like to start? Mr. Sadi?
Nobody's volunteering? I don't think anybody.
Mr. Perkins? I'm hoping that we, Mr. Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to keep the term limits to 2 years. Could I do that?
Put that in the form of a motion. I didn't hear if it was in the form of a motion. I'm sorry.
I make a motion to recommend to the Charter Revision Commission that we keep the terms at 2 years enough for.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded by Mr. Esposito or Mr. Cheney. I'm not sure. I didn't catch it. Mr. Cheney. Under discussion on the motion to keep the term of office 2 years. Mr. Kern.
You know, my feeling on this is that I believe that we should separate the term one, be one of the ones to separate in a referendum, and let the public vote on whether to go 4 years or 2 years. We've got, not that we're going to be, we have nothing to lose, because if they don't want it, they want it to stay the way it is, then let them have that choice. I don't see the problem with just let it stay in the charter revision, but put it as a separate vote at the voting, the time of voting.
Mrs. McMahon?
I also agree with Councilman Kern. I think it should go to the voters, and that's my opinion.
Thank you, Mrs. McMahon. Point of order, Mr. Sadi?
Through the Chair of the Corporation Council, because we're going to have several different issues before us in succession, almost a laundry list of things. Generally, and correct me if I'm wrong, the limitation, or whoever wants to answer, the limitation on individuals speaking. I'm concerned that the limit, if it's 2 times that a person can speak, that what we... I was going to ask that...
I think I'm going to grant latitude tonight.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
Because of the complexity of the issue, I think I'll just grant some latitude on that.
So we can speak multiple times. Thank you.
But I think what we should do now is, I think one of the things we should stick to is term limits. And I think we should get that issue resolved on where we want to go with that, and then we can move on to the next issue that comes up after that. But I think once term limits are addressed, I think we should leave it as addressed to term limits. Mr. Cheaters?
Thank you, through the chair, to the actual Charter Commission. Through the 17 months since you were a body, I didn't hear a lot of my constituents come to me saying we got to have 4 years or we got to have 2 years. What items came before you to make you determine that a 4-year term is needed? Is there things that you wish to share to this body here to make you come up with that conclusion?
Mr. Morano, would you like to come and field that question? You can certainly come right up here and use the microphone for the benefit of our viewers at home, as well as those of us that are hard of hearing.
All right, I'm Carlo Morano, and I was, still am, chairman of the Charter Revision Commission. 4-year terms was really something that we heard from on several occasions, and it was controversial, there is no question about that. But as we looked at the way the capital budget in the city was set up, the fact that it was hard sometimes to bring bonding before the public during election years and things, and as the city itself seems to be growing and becoming more complex, we just had a lot of feedback that 4-year terms would make some more sense so that people would have longer terms in office, could take a longer view of the issues at hand, and that they felt it would be a little bit more efficient form of government. Nothing special about that.
Mr. Cheney, does that answer your question? Thank you, Mr. Morano. Mr. Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really can't disagree more with those who think that we should just send this either as a whole document to the voters, or that right now we should decide whether or not 4 2-year terms is a good issue, all due respect to my fellow council members, based on the possibility that we might separate this question out. We can't decide that tonight as to how to separate these questions out. We're deciding on these recommendations. When the documents come back, as council explained, then we can decide to separate them out. I would support the limit to 2-year terms. We've had many successful mayors, we have many people reelected time and time again, and have functioned with continuity in their administrations. Just at this level of government, and even look at our state legislature, our House and Senate, they're every 2 years. I think those that spoke and said that we're expected to sort of get our feet wet very quickly in this job. That's true, and we need to do that, and I think all of us have done that. So I strongly oppose increasing this to 4-year terms and support the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I just interject here? You could, depending on what happens to Mr. Perkins' motion, somebody could make a motion tonight to recommend splitting the question.
Recommend.
Yeah, it would be a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak to the 4-year term and the idea of splitting the question. The idea of splitting the question, it becomes a difficult one. I attended many of the Charter Revision Commission meetings, and the things that the public doesn't understand, and that's why they elect us to understand all of the ramifications involved here. Things like, in this state, we have no recall provision. And one of the first things out of the mouth of all of those city leaders that have been indicted around the state, just as in Hartford, is, I will not resign. And that means that litigation has to continue on for 4 years, and the taxpayers are left, the citizens are left behind because they don't understand that there is no recall provision that we can take people out of office. As a matter of fact, I think in the case of Bridgeport Joe Ganim, they had to pay him off to get him out, to get him to resign because he was for 4 years, as well as in Waterbury, the 2 of the mayors there were paid off for sick time and sick leave. So that dividing the question and getting into all of the nuances, the public is not aware of what they'd be voting on. I initially was very much in favor of extending the term to 4 years. But when I understood about, first of all, we don't have anything in our Constitution that allows for term limitations. So you couldn't have a mayor and elect them for 2 terms and say, well, he's reached the maximum. A mayor could stay in office for 15, 20 years very easily and continue to build a political base that would be very difficult to overcome. And I think we've dealt with 2-year terms in Danbury for a number of years, and I think that it served us well, and we ought to continue. Most other branches of government are 2 years. Congress members, the only ones are senators, and they're 6 years, and that's too bad. But most other office holders, it's a 2 years term. And I think, like I said, we shouldn't divide any of this charter. It should be the whole or none. When we, as a body, should work out the good points and the bad points and make our recommendations to the public, which they put us here for, based on our understanding of what's in their best interest.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. Mr. Raton?
Thanks, Mr. President. You know, the constituents didn't set us up here to turn around and send stuff back to them every 5 minutes. I mean, we have a recommendation tonight to go to 4 years. With all due respect to the committee to revise the charter, I have not had a constituent talk to me about extending term lengths ever. And I've been in public office in Danbury since the 90s. Sometimes they actually talk about shortening limits, as we heard tonight. But without being facetious about this, there's a couple of structural issues with 4-year terms that we don't really bump into too much with 2. A couple have been mentioned already this evening. Term limits, recall provisions that are non-existent within a 4-year term or even within a 2. The ability to, a particular philosophy that I have, that the closer you are to your constituents, the shorter your term should be. There's some precedent for having a 6-year term with a senator, only 100 of them, and they represent 300 million people in the entire country. you're on the student council, maybe you ought to get reelected every 9 months. But somebody who is essentially a ward boss in Danbury has no excuse to require a 4-year term. You can make a case about a mayor. They're wearing 2 hats, the political head of the city, and they're also the city manager. And in Danbury, we don't separate those 2 positions. So that's actually a big job, and if it's done right, it can require, as we all know, many, many hours a day. But I still think that the 2-year term is the best way to go for this. But there are other issues in this document that bump into the 4-year term. One is, let's see, I think it's section, where am I? Trademark, there's a glasses here, excuse me. Section 311. This would be the reducing by 1/3 the amount of electors needed to force a referenda during a 30-day period after an item is voted up on the agenda, going from 15% down to 10. It's my understanding that this ties into state statutes, and I'll defer to Rick or Les on this, but the idea would be that if there was a referendum forced, in some likelihood they might have to wait for the next municipal election or the next regularly scheduled election to bring that referendum up. And if we went to a 4-year term, I wonder if somebody might have to wait 2, 3, 4, or even perhaps over 4 years for that to come into play. So I'd like those questions answered before we vote on this tonight. And again, I'll defer to Corporation Council, the Mayor's office, whatever. But I would be more comfortable instead of breaking up the question, sending it back. The Charter Revision Commission is here tonight. They heard testimony. They have a pretty good idea where the city is on this. I would be more comfortable instead of separating the 2 questions, simply making a recommendation to them to reevaluate a 4-year term. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just address that. We often have had referendum that have taken place outside the normal municipal election cycle. We have used under my administration the presidential preference primaries. They're a great vehicle because you got everybody together and you got checking people, and we've had referendums on those days. We've done them on state elections that happen as well. And we've called special referendum dates where we didn't align with any particular election, but we just opened the polls and had the election. So I don't necessarily see an impact there in terms of being able to do referenda on specific items. There's plenty of flexibility to be able to do that, and by no means these charter changes would prohibit you from scheduling a referendum at any date and time.
If I could follow up, what would be the maximum? Let's say that there was a conflict between the legislative and the administrative, and somebody didn't want this to go to referendum. What's the actual maximum? The state then steps in and says you have to do this now. Sure, you could do one whenever you wanted to, but how long could you wait? Does it have to be the next scheduled municipal election? Could you not have it at all?
The statute says that when the petition is successful, and frankly, there are a number of different statutes that this applies to, or that apply to this, and they indicate that you will schedule the referendum for the next regularly scheduled election or a special city meeting. And I don't think that there's a general deadline that's applicable to all referenda.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I initially did support the 4-year term, and I'm going to tell you why I did speak in front of the Charter Revision. And it was because I felt like it is expensive for us to run every 2 years. And if it was every 4, it would open the opportunity for other people to be able to run for this office who may not have been able to financially hold the burden. And that was my initial thought. Since then, since this has hit the paper, and I do get calls from my constituents about they really are more in favor of a 2-year term, I will be more than willing to listen to what my constituents say, and if that's what the decision is in the city, I will completely back it up.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Any other comments on this? Motion, I give a motion.
We move to recommend to the terms of office of 2 years.
No, I just had one comment, if I could. Mr. Calderon?
I was going to second the motion.
Well, it's already been seconded. We were all just under discussion. But what I would just wanted to say was that I followed the Charter Revisions Commission process on this, and you know, I'm caught between both. I would like to see a 4-year term for several reasons, and I think there's some good arguments as to why a 2-year term also works. But I will tell you, as one of the gentlemen that said here tonight was about splitting the question and putting it out to the voters and letting them decide. This is the people of Danbury's charter. This is their constitution, not ours. And although we're members of the city, I think that it is an item that, if it's this controversial, should be split out, and it should be voted on in November by the public, and let them make the decision on this. I think they have the right to do that. So I will be supporting the 4-year term, but I will be supporting a 4-year term when the motion makes it to that point.
Thank you. Mr. President, I just want to get this straight for myself. If I was to vote no, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm supporting a 4-year term. It's just that I want the voters to have the say in this.
Well, what will happen is if you vote no,
Then we
if
have
the majority votes no,
then have to
then
have another motion.
Mr. Perkins' motion will fail. And then another motion will have to be made to make a recommendation of what you want to do with a 2- or 4-year term. And then we would take that up under discussion.
Point of order, we don't actually need another motion. Just not have a motion.
Oh, but I don't think that we're going to move from this point without somebody making another motion, because we have no direction to give the Charter Revision Commission.
Again, I don't think we're chartered to split this document tonight. Is that correct? Don't we have to do that at the next?
You can do it now.
We can?
Yeah.
That's all right.
You can recommend it.
We can recommend that they split that?
That's right. That's what you're doing.
Recommend they split it, and then have us have a vote and bring it to the people.
Bear in mind what's going to happen is that in the end, the Charter Revision Commission is going to give you a final document, and the call on how many questions to split that into, that's strictly yours. Well, you can have a sense of it tonight, but it's frankly to save you the labor that's involved in considering it in detail and in depth at some later date.
In other words, Mr. Riddell, you could recommend that tonight. Mr. Perkins has a motion on the floor, so you should conduct a vote on that. But assuming that if they were to pass, that's the issue. If it were to not pass, and Mr. O'Connor wants to make a motion to recommend to the Charter Revision Commission in the final draft to have a split question based on that, do you want a 4-year term or do you not? You could do that tonight. That issue, as Mr. Gottschalk would say, is now off the table, and that'll be reflected in the final draft report to you. That's basically.
I thought that was solely our purview, but that's fine.
Well, you're giving them direction, and when that report comes back, you could absolutely move to merge them back together if you want.
Mr. Levy?
Through the chair of the Corporation Council, so I have an understanding. When it comes to dividing questions, when we finally adopt an ordinance, in the ordinance that we adopt as a body in full session, we can, at that time, designate what gets divided. The Charter Revision Commission is only making recommendations on the substance of the charter, not how it's presented or if it is presented to the public at all. Is that correct?
Charter Revision Commission is going to give you a document. It's called a draft report. It's going to contain the various sections of the charter that they propose to you for amendment. What you do with it is your call. You can reject the whole thing. You can accept certain parts of it and And of those parts that are accepted, you can choose to forward them to a vote of the people at some time within the next 15 months in a dozen questions. Also, by the way, if you reject any of the provisions of the final report, there is an opportunity for the public to, as unlikely as it seems, get a petition drive together to add them back.
Okay, anything else on Mr. Perkins' main motion? If not, I'll try your minds. A yes vote to Mr. Perkins' motion would be to recommend to the Charter Revision Commission that they come back with a recommendation to us for 2-year terms. A no would defeat that. Try your minds. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, well, the ayes, and all those against, say to vote. Those are roll call vote.
McMahon? No. Magerseth? No. Hallis?
No.
Trombetta?
Yes.
Calendino?
Yes.
Perkins?
Yes.
Visconti?
Yes.
Chianese?
Yes.
Esposito?
Yes.
Sadi?
Yes.
Cabo?
No.
Martello?
Yes.
Diggs? Yes. Teichels? Yes. Orkanti?
No.
Curran?
No.
Knapp? Absent. Levy?
Yes.
Riley? Seabury?
No.
Stanley? Yes.
The motion passes by 12 to 7.